Okay,
Okay.
I've got it.
Oh, here. It says the account owner can also watch this recording if it's stored in the cloud. Okay. I mean, what?
I just recorded it to my computer, so I think
Really?
we should have it either way.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, May the 19th. Depending on where you're at in the countryside, you've either got beans at V2, V3, V4, or you got beans that you just got planted, or you got some just coming out of the ground. But really wanted to take some time here and kind of talk about pixie dust. You guys have heard for 3 years now our relationship with Dr. Kurt Livisey. I'm excited to be joined by him today. He's going to go through and kind of talk about why he created it, why his focus was on potassium, silica, and really what he's trying to accomplish with that. So we're going to record this, and this will be sent out. You guys will be able to view it as many times as you want. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to a BWTA. We can always elevate the questions to Dr. Livesey if it's something that we don't know. But just really wanted to take some time just so you could hear directly from Dr. Livesey and the why it was created, and what it's doing, and some of the cool data that he's got. I know he's awful excited about some data that they've got this year that I'm sure he's going to share about. So with that, Kurt, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bodie. I appreciate it. And again, love our partnership, love working with you guys. And I'm excited about the opportunity to talk about our PiKSiDust line today. In particular, we're going to talk about PiKSiDust Plus, but several of your guys have seen this slide before. This is sort of our kind of sums up our whole thing, right? PiKSiDust and all of our PiKSiDust line crafted by science to work like magic. And I just want to remind everybody that all of these products that I put together with you guys or for you guys really are grounded in science. So that's something to keep in mind, that all of the raw materials and the different things that I use as I'm mad scientisting in the lab, there's published data to back up all of this stuff, which I feel really good about, and I think that shows through in the results that we'll talk about at the end. So speaking of which, how I build products, as Bodie has already pointed out, everything I do begins with silica. I'm like the biggest believer in silica probably in the whole wide world. Just when you look at the impact that it has on the plant, and even though it hasn't been recognized still yet as a quote essential element, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that term, but it's still really important that we do know, and that all the scientists do agree on. From there, I look at adding other things on a sort of per crop and per need basis, whether those are vitamins, amino acids, and a whole bunch of other proprietary stuff that I have access to. And it's always really with this goal of how do we mitigate stress, right? So how do we figure out what's bothering that plant, and how do we remove some of those factors, or try and minimize the impact, I should say, of some of those factors. So Bodie had pointed out, I'll probably talk a little bit about why silica and what sparked this whole thing for me, and that's exactly where I want to start. If you guys take nothing else from this presentation, I don't know if the little window's blocking this here or not, so I'll move this over to the side. But if you take nothing else from this presentation today, I want to make sure you take away this. And that is that silica in general, and PiKSiDust Plus in particular, which we're going to focus on today, is a stress mitigator. And you're saying, well, what do you mean? What kind of stresses? We'll talk about that here in a second. But I want to have a sort of bigger conversation, or make a bigger point first, which is there's this dirty little secret in agriculture that I don't know that we spend enough time talking about, and that's this, guys. There's no product on the market that can actually increase your yield. All we can do is decrease yield loss. So if you take something like the Full Sun product, and now Bodie, correct me if I speak out of turn on this in any way, shape, or form, right? But what you're essentially doing with like Full Sun is you are increasing the photosynthetic capacity, or sort of maximizing the ability of that plant to capture the photosynthetic potential that's out there, which implies that there's photosynthetic potential that's being lost right now, right? That whether we don't have a big enough leaf or a solar panel, or we've got too much cloud cover, or whatever these factors are, these are things that are actually robbing that plant of its ability to maximize or achieve maximum photosynthetic potential. So when you look at something like Full Sun, you are helping the plant to achieve that. So you are decreasing the yield loss that is associated with not achieving maximum photosynthetic potential. If you guys talk about like a herbicide, for instance, right? If you go out and spray a herbicide on your field and you have literally no weeds, and I don't mean, they're this tall and you just don't see them. I mean, like, go with me theoretically here. If weeds did not exist, there would be no reason to spray a herbicide on your field because the weeds aren't there to take yield away from your plants. So, we talk about, boosting yields and all these different terms that we use in agriculture, but the reality is, guys, we're not actually increasing yield, we are decreasing yield loss. And it's a subtle change in our thinking, but it's one that's really important to wrap our head around when we start talking about things like silica. Because with silica, right, we are mitigating stress. And in fact, when you look at the principle, the Liebig's law of the minimum, or the principle of the limiting factor here, and I should ask real quick, Bodie, does my window block the text on the screen or not?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, great. It's off to the side then. So as long as you guys see that, that's great. But when you look at this like really famous picture, right, that everybody talks about, and you've seen all these presentations, you may not have noticed, but silica is actually included on here. So we know, and I'm going to back up here, right, that if we have enough phos or calcium for say a 300 bushel corn crop, but you've only got enough K for a 140 bushel corn crop, well, guess what? You're gonna top out at 140. But one of the staves of these barrels is silica, which is to say, even though it may not be a plant essential element, we know that we can decrease yield loss, right? That we can essentially raise the whole potential of the plant when we have adequate silica to the plant. So that's important. Another way I like to think of it is it's an insurance policy, right? Like you've probably got your car insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your general liability policy, and silica is like an insurance policy. And it is an insurance policy against a specific set of stressors. Now, the research, the scientific literature is super clear. Silica, and I'm not talking about pixie dust in particular here, this is silica in general. Silica in general gives us an insurance policy against a host of biotic factors like bugs, pests, diseases, and so on. The problem is when we start making those claims about an individual product, the EPA says you've now crossed over into pesticide land. So for that purpose, I'm not going to make any claims about what PiKSiDust Plus can or cannot do regarding biotic factors. I'd say go read the research. It's quite interesting and enlightening. The claims that I will make, however, are all over here on what we would call the abiotic side. So, salt stress, temperature, light, pH, minerals. There's a host of different things, of different abiotic stressors that rob yield from our crops that we can start to help to mitigate or minimize through the use of silica. And now I will say through the use of the PiKSiDust products in particular. And the two I want to focus on today, because I think this is about to be really relevant, really super fast, are heat stress and drought stress. So let's talk a little bit about how does it work. And notice the nifty little branding that I've got there with the sticking with the elemental symbols, okay? So it depends. Silica works differently in different kinds of plants. So I want to compare and contrast monocots and dicots, and in particular, we'll just say for ease of use, corn for monocots and soybeans for dicots, okay? And this, again, is all based on the scientific literature. In fact, you'll see the citations at the bottom of the page here. In monocots, and this is a study that was published here in the last couple of years, so there's some great diagrams you'll see. In monocots, there's this, if you look down here near the bottom right-hand corner, these are genes, this LSI1 and this LSI2. So we would start with a soil application or like an in-furrow application with, say, PiKSiDust. I know you guys are doing a lot with the Works and Synergy products, and in case you guys don't know, PiKSiDust Plus will not mix with calcium. So those products are incompatible to use at the same time, which is why we are also testing a new PiKSiDust 2x2. Some of you have heard me talk about that a little bit. So we are exploring an option this year, brand new beta testing, where we could take the PiKSiDust concept and move it out into a 2x2. So you could still run like your Works and Synergy in the furrow, and you can move the silica portion of that out, and we'll have it actually be compatible with nitrate, which I've never been able to do before. So I'm excited about that. But the point is in monocots, primary silica uptake is always going to happen through the roots because we have this LSI1 gene, which allows silica into the root, and then we have the LSI2 gene, which allows it to cross that Casparian strip and get into the xylem and up into the plant. The problem is that dicots don't have that LSI2 gene. They've got the LSI1. In fact, there's a cool new research study showing that in 2021, it was just published, where silica can get into the roots of dicots, but it doesn't cross that strip to be able to translocate up and down the plant. So in a monocot like corn, right, we're going to go in through the roots, and then with the process of transpiration, so as that water goes up and then out the leaf through the stomata, silica actually goes up and then accumulates inside the plant near the stomata, and we get this sort of reinforcing effect. We call it the silicification, where we add silica in between the cell walls and we make the plant stronger, and we can help reduce lodging and some cool things like that you've heard me talk about with all the in-furrow stuff. So that's monocots. Dicots, on the other hand, we've got to look at a foliar application. And again, this is super clear through the research, because whereas we can pull it up through the roots in monocots, we can't get that translocation in dicots nearly as well. But when we do a foliar application, we're putting it on right there by the stomata, and we still get some of that uptake, and we also get it to like physically sit on the leaf. So you're going to get better efficacy of the product, right, when we go with a foliar product on dicots, which is why, and to make this really crystal clear here, we've got PiKSiDust for in-furrow applications through the roots, and then we now have PiKSiDust Plus through foliar application. And again, it's obviously showing a grasp, but the idea is foliar application are for dicots. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing with heat and drought stress. And again, this is from a study published just last year in the Journal of Soil Sciences and Plant Nutrition. So we're going to get several positive things that happen in terms of how we're going to mitigate stress with silica. So we get a cooling effect, right, by a thermal emission of heat from these silicified structures. We talked about the process of silicification. So we're actually sort of protecting those cells from overheat damage. We get enhanced polysaccharide content and increased mechanical strength of cell walls. Bodie, the last time I was at one of your guys' meeting, I cannot count the number of times we talked about sugars, polysaccharides, right? It's the currency that the plant uses to interact with the microbes and to get the positive benefits, because the plant gives these sugars to the microbes, and then we get the benefits from the microbes and all the positive things that happen with that back to the plant. But sugar is that currency that happens that the plant needs for that exchange. So we can enhance the polysaccharide content, and we strengthen the cell walls mechanically with that silicification process. We're going to enhance the chloroplast integrity and prevention of chlorophyll degradation. In other words, again, keeping those cells from getting so hot that they essentially explode. We can help with that with silica. We get mechanical strength or enhanced mechanical strength in the xylem. So it's a weird thing, and I don't know how to explain this very well. But what it does is it actually increases the pressure inside the plant. So it increases nutrient uptake because we've got more pressure that therefore forces more nutrients up in the xylem. And then even down in the root zone, we can increase the water holding capacity and water use efficiency. So we start tying into drought stress as well. Heat and drought a lot of times go hand in hand. We're literally able to be more water use efficient when we look at using a silica, and in particular, again, PiKSiDust Plus, like on our soybeans.
Hey, Kurt.
Yeah.
So for those people that are going to be watching this and are going to say, a quick Google search says that silica is one of the most abundant nutrients in our soils. Why, number one, is your focus so much around silica with it being so abundant? And number two, why did you create a product if it's as abundant as what they say?
Excellent questions. Let's go back here to this slide. So where this says PiKSiDust right here is actually, you'll notice there's a line going up there. That's from an old presentation I did where normally that zooms in and covers everything up, because the overwhelming majority of the silica in the soil, in fact, you see it down here, silica fractions in the soil, the overwhelming majority of that silica is not able to be captured by the plant. It's not in a plant available form. It doesn't weather quickly enough to become available to the plant. And when it does convert eventually to monosilicic acid, it's an anion. So it's kind of like nitrate or sulfate, right? It moves down quickly in the soil profile. It's use it or lose it. So even though it is abundant, doesn't necessarily mean it's there for the plant to take it up. So it's, we've talked about, and I know you guys have talked a lot about this. I've heard Jason talk a lot about this in his next level ag presentations. There's the portions of the soil potassium, right? Where we've got what's potassium, what's going to become available, and what is available to the plant. And each of those gets smaller by a magnitude of like multiple, it's exponential, right? Of magnitude of multiples. So in the same way, there's a lot of silica out there. It's just not really available to the plants. And so what I did was, I looked at all kinds of silica sources, good grief, when we got started with this, calcium silicates, sodium silicates, potassium silicates. And what I ultimately ended up with was I wanted something that would be, slow release is not the right word, but I wanted something that needs a catalyst to be able to sort of break down and become available to the plant. And guys, I'll tell you this, whether you're a dealer or a customer, know that I believe very strongly, given the results we've seen with PiKSiDust and with PiKSiDust Plus, there's about to be a whole bunch of Me Too products coming to the market. I really believe that. And at some point, what somebody's going to say is, well, but ours is monosilicic acid or orthosilicic acid. That's the only kind that's plant available. And that is entirely true. That is what is available to the plant. A potassium silicate in and of itself is not available to the plant, okay? However, here's the catch. An ortho or monosilicic acid is highly reactive. It will instantaneously grab onto anything, zinc, manganese, calcium, any of the cations that are available. It's going to bind up with those as quickly as it possibly can. It's incredibly reactive. It's another reason why we don't see this super abundant available. We don't see the available forms super abundantly in nature because it likes to tie up quickly. So by starting with a potassium silicate base, which is what I did, I've got one that bond between the potassium and the silicate can actually be broken relatively easily. It has to go through the process of hydrolysis, which is to say in an aqueous solution. So whether we put it in water or we put it in straight into fertilizer, or we put it in, like with the powder keg product, we put it right into Environoc ST, right? What happens is that liquid starts to break that bond, but it buys us some time. This is why, guys, if you read the label, we say, hey, we don't want you to mix this up and put it in a jug and leave it out there and use it 3 weeks later. We want you to use this, roughly within 24 hours of when you do it, because it starts out in a form that needs to be broken apart. But the instant we put it in water, it starts to break apart. By the time it gets to the plant, we are plant available. So there's the chemistry behind this is fun and unique. Some of you are thinking that it's boring. That's okay. I'm a nerd. I get it. But it's really interesting. And like I said, I was very intentional in the way that I did this. So calcium silicate's great, but it's kind of like sludge or paint. Sodium silicate, the reason I stayed away from that, even though it's quite soluble, I don't know anybody that needs more sodium. Bodie, have you ever met anybody that's like, hey, give me more sodium in my, I just haven't seen that yet. So for those reasons, I opted for a potassium silicate base. And then, like I said, we go with, a blend of whether it's a vitamin or amino acids or all of the above or other proprietary acids. Depending upon what use I'm looking for, I'll find different synergists that go with it. And that really is where we start to get some of these other cool effects too, because it's not just what is silica doing, but it's what is silica and these aminos doing together that's getting, that are adding to these benefits that we're seeing, or how are we enhancing, the like protecting the chloroplast, for instance, or how are we enhancing the water use efficiency? So everything is built to work synergistically together. Does that answer? It's a long answer to a short question, but did I answer it?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this again, a recent study from 2020. These are some pictures of, this is on tomato, obviously not soybeans, but it's still a dicot. And I just want to point out, we've got normal conditions, and then we have like a heat and drought stress condition over here. And obviously the ones with the normal conditions, the plant looks healthier with or without silica. You say, well, look, the normal condition without silica is better than the heat stress with silica. Yeah, of course it is, because we didn't put heat stress on the plant. That's the point, right? Like I've literally just talked about this. Heat stress is robbing the yield, and silica is helping to mitigate that yield loss. And I love this picture because it illustrates that so nicely. So here again, as we go down the line, you can see how these plants look. And what I love is when we get down into the root zone, the impact on the roots, where even under the normal conditions where we have no heat stress, look at the difference in the root mass with the silica versus without the silica. And then look how pronounced it is where we've got, I would argue, and again, maybe I'm seeing things, I would argue that the heat stress plant with the silica has a better root system than the normal plant without the silica, right? I mean, when you look at the depth and the general overall mass of that, we're driving those roots down. We're going to be able to go down and get the water where we need it as we start to face heat and drought. So just a real world scientific example of, how silica plays out when we apply this to a dicot. So in foliar application, again, a couple major things to really talk about here that I want to hit on. We really get that photosynthetic efficiency driven up by working with those chloroplasts and protecting that. We're boosting the cell wall strength, and we're improving the root structure and the root biomass. Guys, this is your recipe for how do we get through that stressful time? How do we get through, those hot end of July, middle of August days where the sun's just beating down on that plant and the plant's going, help me, right? Like it needs help, and we can provide that help with PiKSiDust Plus. So when does it work? And this is really important though. When I say, don't miss this. Okay. This is critically important. I know that we're, like Bodie said, May 17th. And we're like right on the time right now. Okay. Cause timing is critical. When we look at a soybean plant, we want to get out there between early veg. I would even, if we want to extend that to V1, that's fine. There's your green line, but really V3 is kind of like, it's not my hard window, but you got to get out there before bloom. And the reason for this, guys, is, how do I explain this? Well, here's the best way, I think, the best example to explain this. Bodie, Kip Cullers and I, we're good friends. We used to travel all over doing a lot of meetings. And I heard Kip use this example one time. So this is a slide that'll be burned into your brain, whether you want it to be or not. Okay. He says, think about a cow. He says, I'd always rather be on the front end as being on the back end. And the window is kind of the same thing, right? Because if you're on the front end, you're right up here. If you're on the back end of the cow, you might have an oh crap moment. So what my point is, guys, yeah, there you go. There's that chuckle. The point is that it is a good illustration, right? You want to get out there earlier rather than later because you want to maximize the impact that we're having on that plant to basically, ramp up that plant's immune system, to ramp up that plant's nutrition and really set the stage. Like, are you going to go out and like fix your roof in a rainstorm, or do you want to have your roof fixed before the rain comes? And in the same way, we want to make sure that we're out there early in veg, not out here in bloom, so that we can maximize the benefit that we're getting really from the PiKSi Dust Plus. So really important, guys, get out there while we're in vegetative growth. Really buy V3 is really critical. You want to comment on that at all, Bodie?
Yeah, some of that's new. I think when we look at how we've positioned it and told a lot of our folks is the timing is absolutely critical. V5 we know that total number of nodes on a soybean plant is determined by V5. As I'm listening to this presentation and all of the things, you never said anything about how you can increase the total number of nodes with a PDP application. However, looking at a lot of these factors of what you do, enhancing chlorophyll, enhancing or reducing the stress piece, we know that if we can lower that stress level, if we can enhance that photosynthesis, there's probably a pretty good correlation to be able to increase that node count, right? So if we can do that, then we've talked about V3 to V5. What I think is new that I'm hearing for the first time, and maybe I just missed it, is you're talking about moving that window even up into the V1 timeframe. That V1 to a hard cutoff at V5. But a V1 to a hard cut at V5 with V3 being optimal, that's new. And I'm glad that we're doing this because I actually had a call, I think it was about a week ago, that said, hey, I've had beans that have been in the ground for over 30 days. We planted when it was cool. We know that the stress levels are fairly elevated on them. We know that there's been an energy burn or an energy consumption just to go through the germination process and to try to get that push going through that ground. Can I spray PDP at V1, or am I wasting my money? And I think that this illustration really proves that window is probably V1 to V5, with maybe your ideal spot being at V3.
Yes, 100%, 100%. The major thing is, like I said, we got to get it on before we get to reproductive. But yeah, V3 would be sort of ideal. And as we saw from the cow there, right, I'd rather be on the front end as on the back end, as Kip always says. So good little illustration. As far as other factors to consider, when I think about the impact of heat stress and drought stress, I think about a sandy soil that is going to, well, here, everybody's seen the soil texture chart, right? So, and this is about soil compaction, but I use this because it illustrates the point for me. So what's called the normal soil, I'm going to say is sandy, and what it's calling compacted, I'm going to say is clay for the purposes of illustration here. But in your sandier soils, that water is going to percolate right down through there. It's going to burn up more quickly. We know that in the sandier soils, that water leaches down through faster. So we're going to face heat stress and drought stress more quickly, more rapidly in a sandier condition than we are in like a heavier black soil. So if you guys are like, hey, I want to try this for the first time, where is it going to probably work best? I would say go with the place where you're going to face the stress. I tell everybody, look, that there's sort of two extremes here. If there's no stress at all, if you had theoretically perfect growing conditions, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do much for you. Flip side, I don't really know anybody that's ever had perfect growing conditions, so I would say take a shot at it. On the other end, right, like this product is not Jesus. This ain't going to resurrect your crops from the dead. So like if it's completely burned up and dead, it's not going to do much for you, okay? But there is that like Goldilocks sweet spot where, hey, we've got some stress. And you're most likely going to see stress in a lighter, sandier soil than you are, or you're going to see it at least more quickly than you are in your heavier ground. So think of it this way, Bodie. If a guy's trying to prioritize which fields do I need to go spray first, maybe that's a good way of talking about real world implications. Start on your lighter ground and then work your way to your heavier ground, because your lighter ground is going to burn up first. Okay. moving on, I just want to share several pictures that these are mostly from you, actually, Bodie. If you want to comment on any of these, feel free. But guys should really notice the difference in, the sort of overall plant health and in the roots, really between the untreated on the left and the treated on the right. And we've got case after case and picture after picture, stem diameter, massive differences, in some of these stem diameters. Like I said, overall plant health. You're noticing more nodes. When you have a healthier plant, you're going to have more nodes. More nodes per plant, more beans per pod, more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know how the math works on all that. And then I want to talk about, as you had pointed out, Bodie, some of the actual numbers, because the plant structure is awesome. It looks cool. The roots are important. We're preventing stress, but this is the new data that Bodie mentioned that I really want to kind of end on. And then I'll take whatever, questions you may have, Bodie. I know a lot of guys have different opinions on BECS, and that's totally great. But for better or worse, I'm really proud of this. BECS has their PFR. For any of those of you who don't know what that is, that's their practical farm research. What they'll do is they'll take a product and they will test it, and they'll test it again and test it again, and then they publish the results. And they do not care if you sink or swim. Case in point, and again, I don't work for BW. I'm not. This isn't like a paid commercial. I'm not knocking any other companies, but I'm using this as an example. Pivot Bio, for instance, has had a product in BECS for a couple of years that showed negative results, like to the tune of quite a little bit. I think it was like $20 an acre negative 20 ROI. And they publish it. Like, I mean, Pivot's a huge company. They're growing. They're, by all accounts, doing a lot of great things. But BECS has not seen success with that, and BECS will publish it. They do not care. On the flip side, if you get to 3 years of positive return on investment, positive yield, they get to the point where they're like, hey, we're not going to test this anymore. And guys, this has been proven on, I think it was over 9 states, or it was at least 9 states they've tested this in, multiple locations in 9 different states over 3 years. And they say, hey, look, we're PFR proven, we're not going to test this anymore. What I really want to draw people's attention to on this is PiKSiDust Plus is the first and the only non-sugar foliar product that has ever been PFR proven on soybeans. So you've got several different things like, feed grade dextrose, brown sugar nano, Centos from Conklin as a sugar source. All of these are sugar sources in some capacity, or in the nanozyme. I don't know what that is, but that was on corn only. So we are the first and the only non-sugar product to be PFR proven as a foliar on soybeans. And if you look at the numbers on this, our ROI is like almost double the next best thing. So guys, this isn't just about plant structure and mitigating stress. Like, this is completely independent third-party data that doesn't give 2 hoots about me or BW or if the product works or not. Their job is to put good data out there. And so we've got independent third-party data showing that this works. So I just kind of want to end on that, because we were PFR proven effective last year, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished there. Yeah, so with that said, Bodie, I will stop sharing the screen, and we can go back to where we can see your beautiful face. And then if they've got questions or you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, no, I first off, just thank you for taking the time and going through this. We certainly have gotten some questions on this. We saw some things last year, SoyWorks followed by PDP. You want to talk about just some unbelievable structure that we saw in that 1-2 combination. Really, really excited about that. I think that there's things that we have to do on our side as far as the education around carbon. No doubt, if we can affect all of these things, and much to your point, right? Your point earlier about, we know that the genetic yield potential of these soybeans are far, far and above 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 or even 100 bushel beans. But we really got to hone in and say, what are those limiting factors, right? And you made another comment that, 1, this product's not Jesus. 2, that if you have perfect growing conditions, I'm not sure that this product helps you, right? I think our messaging has been very clear, is trying to figure out what is our largest limiting factor in soybean production. If we can reduce the stress, right? You saw a 2.5, I think 2.2 or 2.5 bushel response that was PFR proven, but you've got data out of Wisconsin that was a +7, right? So why do we see a +7 here but a +2 here? And my question, or I guess where I'm going with this is that, do we really understand what the full effect of PDP can potentially be from a yield standpoint, because we know that we have limiting factors, right? We've seen for 3 years now what PDP has done. It's really built a brand in and of itself, really across the United States, with folks that, you can spray some beans and put them on Twitter and you can be like, yeah, there's a 85% chance that those beans have PDP on them,
Yes,
yes. So predictive outcomes, when you think about that, you talked about full sun, predictive outcomes, right? We want to be able to have a conversation of what you should expect to see after an application. I think PDP is one of those things, but I think the science potentially gets lost, right? Now, there is one thing that we haven't covered yet that I want to make sure that we cover, because this is probably where people get a little bit of a glimpse into just how big of a nerd you really are. Because full sun is built at a 64-ounce use strength, right?
Yeah.
Fungicides, there's fungicides on the market. Some are 13.7, some are 12, some are 10.5, some are 13.5. PDP is 1.8 grams per gallon of solution.
Yeah.
But in the world, one, were you thinking, right? Can't you just be normal like anybody else and just a flat rate to run? And number two, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? From a business perspective.
Yep.
From a business perspective, the ugly is if you've got an exact apply sprayer and you can spray 2 or 3 gallon the acre, you can spray with an airplane. This product's really, 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 really cheap, right?
Stupid cheap.
Go ahead and talk about why concentration and what you've seen. Is there a difference if a guy sprays 3, 5, 10, or 15 gallon of water?
Sure. Let me grab a book here real quick, okay? When Bodie talks about me being a nerd, he's not joking, okay? So I have literally thousands of dollars in books like Silicon in Agriculture, Soil Fertilizer and Plant Silicon Research in Japan, Silicon and Plant Diseases, and then I've got a library that of just papers that's probably thicker than this, right, on silica. Here's the deal, guys. What all of these studies show, all the research that's been done, every one of them has been concentration based. I'm not knocking anybody else's product that's going to come along out there along the way, but I understand what Bodie's saying. When I talk about these Me Too products that will eventually hit the market, they're going to come out as a liquid because that's what makes it easier for you guys. And I'm sorry, because I'm a pain in the butt, I get it. But I'm also a purist, and I know that those results that we see in BECS happen because I can point to studies like these and say, look, man, they proved it out in the lab first. And then there's a little bit of an art to tweaking what happens in a lab and applying it to the real world and working with synergists and amino acids and vitamins and all these other things. Right. That's where I come in. That's the experience that I have, or the expertise I bring to the table. But fundamentally, those rates are based upon published, peer-reviewed scientific data. And if I were to go to, a pint per acre or whatever, I just can't account for that anymore. Everything is concentration based. So that's how I build the product. And to Bodie's point, it is massively a pain in the butt because you're like, wait, I got to wrap my head around how to do this. Now, it sounds scary, it sounds annoying, but here's the bright side, like Bodie said. The lowest I think that we've run and actually have data on is 3 gallons an acre, roughly. I know that some guys run it at 5, some run it at 10, 15, 20. And ultimately, you do what works for you. One thing we haven't talked about yet, Bodie, that we should is we actually got PDP fully approved, effective May 1st or whatever it was, with Enlist Duo, Ingenia, Extendamax, and I don't know who all's running dicamba anymore, whatever. But we've got all those approvals, so this can be piggybacked with your herbicide pass. If you're making a herbicide pass at V3, by all means, go for it. Couple things: it is absolutely concentration based, and secondly, we need to be the first thing in the tank. So you do want to pre-slurry this, and guys are having great success. We've really honestly had no problems if you will pre-slurry it. Hear me and hear me well, people. Do not get up and dump this in the top of the tank and then call Bodie or me or any of your guys all ticked off because you had a mixing mess. I'm telling you right now, chemistry, you can't change the laws of chemistry. And the laws of chemistry are you cannot dump this in top last. Cannot be done. You will have a disaster. If you pre-slurry it, put it in then towards the beginning of as you're filling, you should have no problems. Caveat there again, and I know this drives people nuts, but I really know when this works, guys. If your water levels, right, if your bicarbonate levels in your water are north of 200, you need to treat it first. And Bodie, you've got some product, I think, that does that, right? It's like a citric acid based something or the other that helps knock the bicarb out. You might want to talk about that a little bit. But guys, if your bicarb levels are north of 200, fix that first, and then we won't have any problems. I'm such a nerd. I have literally built a database of all the mixing failures we have had over the past like 7 years, and we've had 5 of them, by the way. And I send them in, and every time the bicarb level is like, it's actually north of 250. So I'm telling you 200 to cover my butt. So yeah, but talk about the thing you have that can even fix that, Bodie. And as long as they follow that, they will not have mixing issues.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's one, if you attended the road show, you heard this on a lot of our stuff that we talked about was water quality, right? One thing that we know is when you can get your pH to a 6.5, your bicarbs drop in half, right? We've got a product lineup now that, we kind of, if there's biology involved, we raise our low end of our target pH. If there's no biology involved, we drop that harder, right? It's understanding the products, understanding what they do, and then understanding that the leaf surface that we're trying to get in is typically going to be a 5.5 pH. So do you really think that moving a 7.5 or an 8.2 water pH into a 5.5 leaf is actually going to be extremely effective? And the answer is no. And this is not just, please understand this, this is not just BW products, right? Don't think that because it's BW product and we're talking about water quality, it's like, oh, well, that's another hassle to when I use your product. No. We're the ones that are bringing this information to you, right? This is not really because of BW products. This is much to Kurt's point when he talks about science. This is understanding plant physiology. This is understanding water quality and the impacts that it has. It's understanding bicarbs, right? If you are in Western Kansas and you have elevated bicarb levels and you're putting a lot of water on, you are getting, your soluble calcium levels are displacing. Your ground is becoming harder because you have calcium carbonate. You don't have soluble calcium anymore. So your flocculation starts to dissipate. Your sodium levels start to come up. The same principle happens in foliar nutrition. So if you're going to invest the money in making a foliar application, then make sure your water is right. So with PDP and a lot of these herbicides, if you really actually read a label, which I don't know how many people actually read a label anymore, but if you read a label, a lot of
anymore
pHs, maybe ever, but a lot of these herbicides work significantly better at these lower pHs, right? So I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but we have to start to ask ourselves at some point is, when Roundup first came out, it was concentration based. Like the less water you had, the better response you saw from Roundup, right? Look at what Roundup ideal pH is. If you can get it to a 3.5 or a 4, all of a sudden Roundup does not just become a grass herbicide anymore, right? So point being is Kurt has talked about the science. He showed you the books, how he nerds out. It's concentration based, yes. If you pre-slurry it in water, you dump it in the tank, 0 issues. If you try to put it in last, you're gonna have an issue. If you don't know your water pH, you need to. It is important, right? Not just for ours, but for the efficacy of your herbicide, the efficacy of insecticides, the efficacy of fungicides, right? All of those things are important to know with your water quality. So if you don't know that, please pay the $10, $20, $30, whatever it is, to know what your water sample is, because water quality is really going to be a significant difference between, did this product give me a visual response but no yield response? Did it give me no visual response and no yield response? Or did I get a 5, a 6, a 7, a 2, a 3, or a 4, right? And depending on what rate you spray, because it's concentration based, right? The lower volume you spray. So 5 is less than if you were spraying at 10, right? So if you're running 5 gallons of a total solution, your investment into PDP is half of what it would be if it is at 10 gallon. It is a third of what it would be at 15 gallon, right? So the benefit is it can be extremely, extremely, extremely economical, especially when you factor in the data that he's got before these last 3 years of being PFR proven, which was strong data, but add in the fact that PFR proven now, and again, you know, this is not a commercial for Vex, but they do test a lot of different things. They bring a lot of valuable information to grower, whether it's planter components, whether it's spacing, whether it's closing wheels, whether it's foliar products. So Kurt, first off, congratulations on
Thank you.
and the PFR proven. And again, just as we wrap this up, I can't say thank you enough for taking time out of your day to just kind of go in the weeds a little bit about silica, why PiKSiDust Plus, and how it has a fit on a grower's operation. So with that, I'm going to stop recording, and I just thanks again.